forward to getting into this, so let's dive in and read like we normally do here to start. We're going to start with chapter 1. We're going to start at verse 4. You can advance while I'm reading. Okay, and I'll take over. Yeah, Caleb's taking over for his dad back there, so we're fresh blood running the computer. This is good. All right, chapter 1, starting with verse 4. The Lord gave me this message. I knew you before I formed you in your mother's womb. Before you were born, I set you apart and appointed you as my prophet to the nations. O sovereign Lord, I said, I can't speak for you. I'm too young. The Lord replied, don't say I'm too young, for you must go wherever I send you and say whatever I tell you. And don't be afraid of the people, for I will be with you and will protect you. I, the Lord, have spoken. Then the Lord reached out and touched my mouth and said, look, I have put my words in your mouth. Today I appoint you to stand up against nations and kingdoms. Some you must uproot and tear down, destroy and overthrow. Others you must build up and plant. And then from chapter 7, beginning with verse 1. The Lord gave another message to Jeremiah. He said, go to the entrance of the Lord's temple and give this message to the people. O Judah, listen to this message from the Lord. Listen to it, all of you who worship here. This is what the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of Israel, says. Even now, if you quit your evil ways, I will let you stay in your own land. But don't be fooled by those who promise you safety simply because the Lord's temple is here. They chant, the Lord's temple is here, the Lord's temple is here. I will be merciful only if you stop your evil thoughts and deeds and start treating each other with justice. Only if you stop exploiting foreigners, orphans, and widows. Only if you stop your murdering, and only if you stop harming yourselves by worshiping idols. Then I will let you stay in this land that I gave your ancestors to keep forever. Don't be fooled into thinking that you will never suffer because the temple is here. It's a lie. Do you really think you can steal, murder, commit adultery, lie, and burn incense to Baal and all those other new gods of yours? And then come here and stand before me in my temple and chant, we are safe, only to go right back to all those evils again. Don't you yourselves admit that this temple which bears my name has become a den of thieves? Surely I see all the evil going on there. I, the Lord, have spoken. What's a good story, right? I told you this is going to be a good story. I'm excited to get into this. All right, so let's do that. I want to talk about Jeremiah's call first. And I want to start by talking about what is a call. What does that mean to be called? What is a call or a commission? Well, it's when a person feels like they have been directly chosen to complete a particular task, right? It doesn't just have to be about religious things, although that tends to be the context in which we talk about it for obvious reasons. In Jeremiah's case, though, he was called to be a prophet and to speak God's particular word to the Israelites prior to and during the Babylonian destruction of Jerusalem. And we see that detail here, right? That God says, even now, if you will stop doing these things, what? I will relent. I won't send destruction on Judah. And that points to the Babylonian destruction. A call in the Bible is a very special occasion. There are moments when God makes clear his intent to use the person for his purposes. And being called is not really a typical Church of Christ thing that we talk about. If you, say you were visiting just anywhere in the country and you went up, you were visiting church and you went to a Church of Christ and you went up to the preacher and said, did you ever feel called into doing this? That's probably not the language they're going to use. I don't know why we've kind of distanced ourselves from that language, but it tends to be the language of other denominations. If you walked into a Baptist church, or you walked into a Methodist church, or you walked into a Presbyterian church, and you walked up to their minister and said, did you feel called? They're going to say, yes. And they're going to be able to detail the moment that they felt called to do that work for God, because that's part of their, I just lost the word. That's part of the process that they have to go through to be ordained. That's the word I was looking for, their ordination process. In the Church of Christ, since we don't have that, and Danny and Jim, when they were interviewing me, didn't say, okay, for this process of ordination, we need to know about your calling. I mean, Danny talked to me about my history, right? He wanted to hear about my time growing up in church, who I've been, where I've been, those kind of things, but it was never using this kind of language. I want to make it clear, though, that I think calling is actually, or to be called, to use that language is actually really important. And something that we probably don't do enough. And I would just point you to, say, Jesus himself. Right? I'm going to go to the best example. Jesus himself, what does he do with his own disciples as he's preparing them for ministry? He calls them out of their other tasks, right? Peter, being a fisherman, he calls him out of that life into a new kind of fishing, right? Again, I'm not Peter. You're not Peter. You're not Paul. I mean, I get that. I don't think it's any different for us, really. God is calling us out of our current circumstances and asking us to do things for him, all right? So I want to talk about this interesting thing about call narratives in the Bible, and that is the rejection of the call. In most of the call stories that we read about in the Bible, the individual in some way tries to reject this commission. Right? They try to push it off, they try to sidle out of it, they try to weasel their way away from it. So we see with Moses, God calls Moses to do what? To go back to Egypt, right? To speak to Pharaoh on his people's behalf. What does Moses say? Well, I don't speak very well. Okay, so what, right? That's what God essentially says. So what? I can still use you, right? With Isaiah, if you remember the whole story of Isaiah in Isaiah chapter 6, what does Isaiah tell God? Oh God, I'm unworthy. I live among unclean people. I can't do this for you. I haven't grown up the right way. And God says, I don't care. I'm going to use you anyway, right? And then here with Jeremiah, we see his own rejection. What does he say? I'm too young. You can't use me because I'm too young to do what you're asking me to do. So I want to talk about this idea of being too young, so to speak, for this moment, because I think it merits a discussion. And the truth is, I think this is an excuse that a lot of people use, right? I think it's one that we use when we're younger. And then the truth is, I think it's one that we use when we're older to keep younger people down from doing the things that they feel called to do. Uh-oh, I might be stepping on some toes this morning. It's really interesting that older people tend to use this excuse against young people. We make statements like, you're too young to understand, or you'll just understand when you get a little bit older, right? And while that may be true in certain circumstances, and there are true things about life circumstances that somebody can't fully understand until they, immerse themselves in those experiences, it surely isn't at all. And it doesn't mean that God can't use a person simply because they haven't experienced everything that you happen to have experienced in your life. And I think really, people who make those kinds of arguments are really the ones who are supposed to be doing the teaching anyway, right? Not deriding young people for wanting to step up and take on that leadership. I remember hearing these kinds of arguments all the time when I was in high school. And then also in college. And the truth is, they really struck me. They kind of beat me down a lot at times. But at each and every moment, they were really just kind of hollow. They hurt me, because I didn't want to be seen as a young person who can't speak up whenever I felt like I needed to. But they were also really quite empty because I knew that I had things to say. What's interesting, though, is that in youth ministry, so most of you know that I did youth ministry prior to moving here for about 5 years, and I wish I could only count on one hand the number of times that I myself said this to kids in my youth group. You'll understand when you get older. You're too young to get it now. I found myself making those same kinds of ridiculous, hollow arguments myself to other kids who were, trying to think and do the best things that they could. And I don't want to presume to understand the psychology or the why behind all of it. But I think one of the reasons that it comes about is I think the truth is that most of us are really just very selfish people. Nobody wants to disagree with me on that? No amens, though. I found that one interesting. Nobody else is selfish? Just me? Okay. I think the truth is we're really just quite selfish people. Now here's what I mean by that. We fail often to grasp things outside of our immediate context and our experiences. And we think that everybody else ought to look at the world through our own lenses that we use. So I put on my glasses, not physical, right, because I don't wear glasses, but I put on my glasses and I look at the world, and I see the world the way that I see it. As a white, 35-year-old, middle-class person, married with 3 young daughters, not even sons, right? I have 3 young daughters. I see the world as a southerner. I grew up in the South, in Texas, right? So everything's bigger in Texas. False. But it is. It's bigger in Texas. Everything's bigger in Texas, right? Yeah, that's right. I drive a truck because I'm from the South. I grew up in Texas. We drive trucks. Everybody drives trucks. Even girls drive trucks in the South. That's weird, okay? But we do. We drive trucks in the South. I see the world through my eyes. And so what do I expect of everybody else that I meet? I expect that you're going to see the world the same way that I do. Is that true? No, of course not. And intellectually, what? I know that. Intellectually, I understand that. But the truth is, I'm very selfish, and I want people to see the world the way that I see it. And the truth is, I don't think that changes with age. And so this argument about somebody being too young, I think comes from a selfish place. Because when we think about people who are younger than us, it's clearly they can't be as knowledgeable or understanding or as sophisticated as I am. Because I know more than they do, right? Well, maybe in some ways, right? I mean, I suppose that's true. I have more experience than, say, my 8-year-old daughter. But boy, does she teach me things on a weekly basis. Ways of looking at the world that I wouldn't have thought of at 35, right? And I think that's only going to get maybe worse as I get older. I don't know. Some of you who are older, maybe you can tell me yes or no. But I think that's true. But I don't think it's just the case with age. Think about European, I'm going to call them invaders, immigrants to our country. What did they call Native American Indians? They called them savages. Why? Because they were different? Because they didn't have all the technological advances of the Europeans coming over to this new world? They called them savages. When in fact they were nothing of the sort. They were people living in a land that had been theirs for centuries. They were people doing the best they could with their lives. But you had these new people who thought that these other people ought to see the world the way that they saw it, and if they can't see it the way that we see it, then they must be some kind of other than I am, right? It's a very, very selfish way to look at the world. And I think we do this with those kinds of situations, and also with, thinking about, let's say, previous generations even. I've got all these technological things, right, that I can have at my fingertips. I mean, I have the world's knowledge at my fingertips whenever I get on my iPad. All I got to do is Google it, right? And somebody is out there talking about it. No, they may not be right, but somebody's talking about it, right? I can find knowledge and information within a split second. Doesn't make my life better than somebody from 2 generations ago. It doesn't mean that I know more about life from somebody who lived 1,000 years ago. It simply means that I have a different life and that I see things differently than I do. And I think this is the position that we see Jeremiah in. And probably he's already heard about himself. Somebody's probably already said to him at some point in his life, "You're too young." And I think that's why he probably makes his own argument against himself. And so what I love about this story of Jeremiah is that he doesn't let his age stop him. He doesn't allow these ridiculous arguments, I'm going to call them, these ridiculous arguments of others, to keep him from doing the work that God has asked him to do. This part of Jeremiah's story about his age reminds me of 2 moments in the New Testament that I want to pick up on. The first, you're probably going to know these. The first is the time when Jesus himself is young, in Luke chapter 2, at the age of 12. They traveled to Jerusalem, and what did he do? He stayed behind, right? And Mary and Joseph are looking for him for days. And finally, where do they find him? Talking with all the adults in the temple. Right? Telling these adults, these religious teachers of the law, how the law ought to be interpreted truly. But he's too young, right? He's not allowed to do that. What right, what business does he have telling a 35-year-old, as a 12-year-old, how they ought to understand and see God in their own scriptures? It's really quite a fascinating story. Now, somebody may say, yeah, but he's Jesus. He's allowed to do that, right? Okay. I mean, I suppose you can take that viewpoint. But I think verse 52 in chapter 2 gives us a hint of something that I believe is true about Jesus. It says there in verse 52 that Jesus grew in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and all the people. And there are some who argue that Jesus had perfect knowledge his whole life. I mean, as a baby, he would have had perfect knowledge. I just don't think Scripture teaches us that. I disagree with that understanding of what's happening in Jesus' life. I don't think he had perfect knowledge. I think he actually tells us that directly himself. I think this verse and others tell us that. So when Jesus is conversing with the religious leaders, he was truly doing that as a 12-year-old. He's not a 12-year-old with the mind of God inside of him. This is a 12-year-old growing up, trying to understand the Scriptures and telling them what's going on. There are people who may disagree with me on that. I think that's okay. Because regardless of whether he did have perfect knowledge or not, they didn't see him as having perfect knowledge. How did they view him? As a 12-year-old, sitting in their midst, trying to tell them what to do. Any of you guys want to do that? Want to have a 12-year-old sit in your midst and tell you what to do? Probably not, right? The second passage I want to look at from the New Testament, or talk about real quick, is in Paul's first letter to Timothy. So Timothy, we know, a co-missionary with Jesus, right? Traveled with him, taught with him, a teacher of the gospel, a leader in Ephesus at the time of this writing, was apparently dealing with people who weren't taking him seriously because of his age. Because what do we see Paul write to him there in verses 11 and 12 of chapter 4 in 1 Timothy? Paul says, teach these things and insist that everyone learn them. Don't let anyone think less of you because you are young. Be an example to all believers in what you say, in the way you live, in your love, your faith, and your purity. Paul's urging to Timothy, to me, sounds very similar to God's own urging of Jeremiah in his call in chapter 1. Too young, or too old, too dumb, too out of touch. Probably hear those things a lot. God's calling us in. And so the arguments that people throw back at us, you just don't know enough. You don't know what it's like. You can't sympathize with me. I mean, all those things that people can bring up. Let's be like Jeremiah and do God's work anyway. All right, we got to talk about chapter 7, one of my favorite chapters in the Bible. We're going to talk about the temple of the Lord. And I want to talk about the importance of the temple of the Lord first. And this is probably something you've heard me talk about before, but I'm going to hit the highlights again because it's important. It doesn't hurt to go back over these things. The importance of the temple actually stems from the God who makes the temple important, right? Is it the temple that's important, or is it the God who inhabits the temple that's important? Well, of course, we know that it's God who inhabits the temple that makes it important, but they don't get that, so we're going to try and look at it from their perspective. So what are other things that make the temple important then? Well, the first thing is that it resides in Jerusalem, the city where God chose to cause his name to dwell. And I made this point several times in sermons in the past. Some of you may remember, but it is that important of a point. Jerusalem isn't just some place that the Israelites happen to live. It's not just some other town like Bethlehem or Nazareth or Samaria. It is the town. It is the city where God said, I'm going to make my name dwell right there. It is the literal, physical place where God chooses to show up and meet his people. Jerusalem isn't just this important. It's this important to the Israelites. The temple is also very important because of the sacrificial system to atone for individual and national sins, right? Lest we forget how important that is, all you got to do is go read Leviticus. And if you don't want to read Leviticus, go and read Hebrews. Okay? I'll give you a New Testament book to go read, because people like New Testament books. But if you're brave enough, go read Leviticus. Or read them together. Read Leviticus and then read Hebrews. All you got to do is read a couple chapters into Hebrews and understand how important the sacrificial system is to the people. And when that goes away, when the Jews are taken off into captivity, into Babylon, and they no longer are able to atone for their sins by sacrificing, I just want you to imagine for a moment. All these debates about prayer being taken out of it, nobody can stop people from praying. Okay? I don't buy those arguments. Nobody can stop me from praying. No matter what anybody says, I can pray regardless, right? But I want you to imagine, it's not prayer that's taken away, but my very mode of having my sin forgiven in my life. That's what the Jews face with the destruction of the temple and their being taken into exile in Babylon. And a people who have so defined themselves by this location, excuse me, and by what they're able to do. My throat got a little dry. What'd you do? That's cool. Came out of nowhere. Man. Here, you want to read my notes? Okay, all right. Hang back. All right. Okay, I'm going to try. All right? And finally, for a third reason, the temple is very important because God is its resident. Thank you, Lacey. Wow, that came out of nowhere. Thank you, guys. All right. Because God is the temple's resident. So, it's really interesting in Hebrew. There is no separate word for temple. So for us, we have the word for house, we have the word for building, we have the word for temple, for church, synagogue, all these different things. In Hebrew, in ancient Hebrew, they didn't distinguish between a house that a human lives in, and temple is simply the word house. It's the same word that you would read for Lacey has a house, and Ray has a house, and Adam has a house, and so on and so forth. And so then that begs the question, well, whose house is it then? And of course the answer is, it's God's house. And I think sometimes it's difficult for us to understand the significance of the temple because of our disconnection to it. Right? Not just distance in geography, but also distance in time. And in its significance to God's people. Because God now lives inside of us, right? Instead of in a building. But that's how important the temple is to them. It is literally God's house where He decides to dwell and to live. Okay? I want to talk about false security for a moment. And here's the main issue that God is pointing to with the Israelites through Jeremiah in this message. That they are placing false hope, they're placing false security in the temple itself. Even as special a place as it is, God is saying it's not more important than I am. And the truth is that this false security, I think, can be extrapolated to how the Israelites actually viewed themselves as well. How do they talk about themselves in the Old Testament? That they are the elect of God, right? Certainly God can never punish His elect so much that He might destroy His very presence in their midst. I suppose you can think that, but you'd be wrong, right? Because that's exactly what happens here. They have this false security, this false sense of hope in a building, in a location, because they think they are what's special about their relationship with God. But of course, that doesn't excuse their behavior, as we see it talked about in this chapter. You probably noticed in verse 9 of chapter 7, all the laws that Jeremiah listed that they broke. Well, if you think back to our sermon series on the Ten Commandments, a lot of those crop up here, don't they? There's a reason those Ten Commandments are so important. I think what's really disheartening for me when I read something like this chapter 7, that I think we as Americans have our own false sense of security. We've placed false hope and false security in ourselves, in calling ourselves the elect of God. We've placed our hope in the wrong thing. We placed our hope in ourselves instead of in God. We placed our security in, well, God would never do anything to hurt us, right? Because we're God's people. I think all we have to do is go back and look at Jeremiah to say, no. I'm a coughing fit again. Man, this is not my morning. It's all that dressing I ate. I'm really sorry. I don't know what's coming into me. You ever do that? It gets at the back of your throat and just dries you out. Yeah. Okay. Well, I want to connect this to Jesus' temple cleansing. Now I'm just going to talk about it. It's better than that. Thank you. Everybody in the front row, just watch out. Thank you. I want to turn to Matthew 21. We get this story in Matthew 21 of Jesus cleansing the temple. And here's where I want to end. The connection between Jesus, what Jesus does, and what Jeremiah is talking about in Jeremiah chapter 7. In Matthew 21, starting in verse 12. It says that Jesus entered the temple and began to drive out all the people buying and selling animals for sacrifice. He knocked over the tables of the money changers and the chairs of those selling doves. He said to them, "The scriptures declare, my temple will be called a house of prayer, but you have turned it into a den of thieves." If you think back to Jeremiah chapter 7, what does he say? It's become a den of thieves. I think Jesus sees his mission as being the same as that of Jeremiah's. God called Jeremiah. He gave him the task of explaining to the people, you place your false sense of security in this building and in this location. Look to me for your hope. Look to me for your security. And that's exactly what Jesus came to tell the Israelites as well. Now, of course, they missed it, right? They missed that message, unfortunately. Or at least most of them did. They had too high of an opinion of themselves and of that location. I think if you look again at Jesus' ministry, which conveniently, as I said early on, we're going to be doing in just 4 weeks, he was constantly trying to open the eyes of the Jews. Because God tasked Jesus with challenging the way that people understood their relationship to the temple and therefore to God himself. So much so that if you remember, Jesus compared his own life and death and resurrection to the temple. What did he say? Tear down this temple. I will rebuild it in 3 days. And of course, they all thought he was talking about what? The building of the temple, right? He was talking about his own self, because within Jesus is where God resided. And because of the Holy Spirit, he passed on that gift to us. So that's where I want to leave us this morning. With that vision of hope, that vision of security, that vision of confidence in the person of Jesus being our hope and security, not the temple of the Lord. And of course, we don't have the temple anymore. But the truth is, I think a lot of us direct false security and false hopes in different things. So whether you've heard a call from God like Jeremiah did, if you have, you should probably do. Just saying, if you've heard the audible voice of God lately in your life, you might just call me. We'll sit down and chat. But what might God be calling you to do in your own life? What call has God placed on you in particular? I know we all have the universal call to preach the gospel, right? To be a witness, to be a light. I want you to think about for your own individual life. What does it mean that you are called by God? The second thing I want to leave you with, what argument have you tried to throw at God for why you can't do what He wants you to do? For most of you, it's not that you're too young. That's not an offensive statement. It's just the truth. So what else is it? If you're not too young, what else is it? What argument are you trying to throw back at God for why you can't do what He's asking you to do? And then finally, in what are you and are we placing false security and false hope? These are just some of the lessons of Jeremiah chapters 1 and 7. I'm going to stop talking now before I get it right again. Thank you for your patience bearing with me through that. I really don't know what happened to me this morning. I'm going to go home and drink lots of water. That's what I'm going to do. I'm glad you're here. I don't know where you are in your walk. I don't know how you feel about your call from God. Maybe you've been ignoring it lately. Maybe it's not been, high on your radar list of something that's important. I hope it is. And I hope this morning you're reminded of why it's so important. And so if you have, any need at all for prayer, for baptism, for, say, church family to surround you and to comfort you, we're here for that. We're going to have a song. Please come forward as we stand and sing.